This is Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro. From the corporate office to the cab of a truck, they're here to inspire and empower women in all professions. So gear down, sit back, and enjoy.
Welcome to Women Road Warriors. We're an award-winning show that works to inspire and empower women in every profession. Our goal is to power women on their road to success. We tackle all kinds of topics and work to encourage women to be their very best with informative guests and women who've been champions. I'm Shelley.
And I'm Kathy.
No topic is taboo on our show. We tackle the tough topics along with the not-so-tough topics, and we like to feature experts and celebrities who can assist women in being the very best they can be. Many women and children experience severe abuse and trauma. It robs them of who they are as a human being. These terrible assaults on us inflict lifelong wounds that often never heal. It keeps us stuck and sometimes mired in a downward spiral. It's extremely difficult to regain ourselves and our potential. Demarra West is working to help people rekindle who they are. She's a motivational speaker, therapist, and founder of Be Well, Beautiful Woman. She released her first book about trauma called Me Too, a therapist's journey to heal, find liberation, and joy. Her book is nothing short of compelling. By the time she was 13, Demarra experienced 8 of the 10 adverse childhood experiences scale trauma indicators, which nearly obliterated her existence. The culmination was substance abuse, incarceration, and homelessness. Demarra's dynamic personal memoir and self-help book offer insights for survivors, therapists, law enforcement, and educators. Her story is a powerful rallying cry for survivors everywhere. It offers a roadmap for healing and is a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome even the most challenging obstacles. We wanted to learn more not only about Demarra's book and life story, but about the incredible work she's doing for people to create hope and enlightenment. Welcome, Demarra. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, Shelley, it is such an honor, as well as you, Kathy, to be in sacred space with you both. I'm excited for whatever direction the conversation takes us in, and I'm truly honored to be here.
So good to have you. We have so much in common, which we will discuss in a little bit here.
Yes.
Yes, Demarra, first of all, I want to congratulate you on your strengths and your bravery to come forward with all of this and share this information with other people. Your story is really amazing. Did you want to maybe give us a kind of a summary of what your background has been and how you came into the enlightenment?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for saying that, right? I think that it's, people have a lot of reasons why they don't share their stories. And one of the things that happens with trauma is shame is one of the things that arises. And we often will blame ourselves for the trauma, even when we were completely helpless, right? Held hostage, or a child for that matter, which, at the hands of a caregiver or a close friend or a loved one. So, how I came into this realization that trauma was my work too, even though I knew that I had come from a trauma background. I knew that I aspired to become a therapist, and that took place, I graduated in 2010. I knew I wanted to work with children and families in part because of the lived experience of trauma. But what I was convinced of is that that was the past. And that, as a result of me becoming an entrepreneur and a mother and going to graduate school and, being active in my community, that trauma work was not my work to do as well. And so I facilitated my acknowledgement of my trauma through my work until one day that simply wasn't enough. And one of the things that I talk about in my book is this, these unfortunate and fortunate things that started to come to the surface that made me realize that I had been suffering from trauma, and it had manifested in my life in a myriad of ways, from my relationships to, me being a workaholic and really overcompensating my worth through my work, because that's really, one of the things that I could so succinctly control. And that really put me in a situation where I started to look to holistic modalities in order to heal myself. And so I certainly believe in therapists in therapy as a therapist and someone who's trained deeply in trauma. But I also recognize through my own journey and through what the research shows that holistic modalities, and particularly those that derive from indigenous communities across the globe, have the ability to help us to heal ourselves and to reclaim our power. And, so often in trauma, we disconnect from the body, and not just our power and our worthiness, but literally a disconnectedness from self. And the body is a form of wisdom that we can tap into at any point in time. But if we're disconnected from it, how do we know what we need and want? How are we able to fulfill those needs and wants that we have? How are we able to have balanced relationships, loving relationships, if we struggle with the cultivation of love within the self? Or this, we see the world as a scary place in part because of the trauma that we have endured, and rightfully so. And yet the healing pathways that I've been trained in and I use in myself and I use in my clients have been paramount to helping people to really reclaim the fullness of who they are and to find a space of joy and peace, where they don't have to rely on anything else outside of themselves, like medication, for example. And I'm certainly not minimizing medication, but what research shows is that medication has very little efficacy when it comes to supporting people around depression and anxiety, even though it's one of the most well-known forms of how we treat things like PTSD and ADHD and things of that nature. The efficacy by which that is derived from that kind of method is very minimal. And at best, for people, it becomes the thing that they have to rely on day in and day out. And, healing practices that I talk about so widely in my book and that I use in myself, and as I said before with my clients, have the ability to create sustained healing that has so many benefits to our overall well-being, that I'm sure that we'll explore later on in the interview.
You're offering hope to people, and I think that people who've had trauma may not even realize what they have stuffed down. It's a matter of having to unpeel that onion eventually. And the fact that you've been there, you can really help people. What happened to you in your childhood, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, outside of things that would be considered trauma indicators, as you talked about, related to the adverse childhood experiences scale, I also grew up in poverty. And, even though poverty is not a trauma indicator, because lack creates scarcity, it's also one of the things that oftentimes people have to heal from.
Yeah.
And so I just want to acknowledge that as being a part of our conversation. And so, considering that I experienced 8 out of the 10, there were things around having an absentee father. For much of my life, I had a stepfather that came into my life at the age of 2 who was abusive. And that's one of the trauma experiences that I had, witnessing my stepfather mistreat my mother in really massive ways that disrupted our lives in significant ways for many, many years. Seeing a parent have substance abuse and, the struggling with that, having an incarcerated parent. I encountered sexual abuse, both rape at the age of 13 and gang rape, but then also I was molested at the age of 6. And so those are just a few of the major things that happened over a long period of time. And, I talk in the book about the aftermath of those things, which, you also described for years before I really started to change through finding some purpose. And, I really felt a calling to work with young people and got a job as an assistant teacher the summer before I turned 18. And that was a major turning point for me. I was in community college at that time. But, I really saw my forward momentum. It was compartmentalized externally, right? And it was really based on, my education and the work that I did and my service in community and things of that nature, which can be, very fulfilling until they're not, right? Because until we face the things of our past, then we have things that we need to heal from. Now, one of the things that's tricky about knowing, remembering trauma is that one of the ways that trauma affects us is the brain doesn't always recollect, right? And people can have a sense that they were traumatized, but not know exactly, right? And so, one of the ways that we know whether or not we are, classified as Me Too is if we know for certain that we've had trauma that we haven't faced, that we haven't started to heal in our lives, but also if we have a sense of it, and or if there are certain things that are dysfunctional in our lives. We find ourselves in toxic relationships, in abusive relationships, if we find ourselves self-deprecating and, not really feeling that we're worthy, if we have a hard time maintaining a job, if we are absent of, aligning with our purpose, there's lots of indicators that there's dysfunction in our lives. We have depression, anxiety, if we're operating in fear a lot of the time. So those are the things that we can look to know that there's some opportunities for us to heal. And, anything that we haven't faced, we haven't healed essentially, right? And that was in part the inspiration behind my book, not just telling the story around my very layered childhood trauma and the way that trauma affects children differently than it affects adults, right? It was really also to acknowledge all of us in the fabric of healing, because there were many people who are suffering in that on the surface look like they're doing fine, people with PhDs and who are in abusive relationships, right? Or, there are a lot more people suffering than what we realize. So part of this is also about the normalization of this and an opportunity for all of us to be able to rise to the extent that we too have had similar kinds of experiences.
Kathy,
Yeah.
this really sounds a lot like what you've gone through.
That's exactly what I was just about to say. Is just like, my gosh, I think we're like almost twins in very many of the circumstances. Like myself, my first memory is a hand coming over my mouth before the age of 4, telling me not to scream through sexual abuse and just growing up in extreme family violence and poverty and being raped at 14, and then I was drugged and raped at 18 down in Miami, and I was gang raped at 19, and 3 suicide attempts, and just, oh my God, just a mess. Until I decided that, you know what, I'm just going to stuff it all down and pretend like it didn't happen. And I became a nurse instead and took care of everybody else except for myself.
Yeah.
And I just stuffed and stuffed and stuffed. And the choices, that low self-esteem, that feeling of worthlessness just was so prevalent in my life, even though I had a great career and I love what I'm doing. And I'm a great nurse. Personal life, I couldn't make a decision for the life of me. And I ended up the choices that I made in the men that I chose were directly related to all my past, right? So it just went from bad to worse, and then extreme violence. I mean, I should be dead 10 times over, by, strangled 3 times. It just goes on and on and on until the day, I'm 40 and I just hit a wall. I'm going to work, and I got 10 patients to take care of, and I can't even read the sheet in front of me. I am like just done. But it was the best thing that couldn't have ever happened to me, because that, even though I crashed and burned hard, losing everything I owned and homeless and doing all that and alcoholism, it brought me to actually force me, I should say, to take a look at myself and all the trauma that was so buried deeply. And it was so ingrained that it took me a total of 2 years off and on in this women's treatment center, where I had to unravel. I had to basically unlearn everything and then relearn who I am, and not based on the lies that I grew up with and how awful I am. And the hardest part, I say, is basically accepting how awesome I am. It takes decades. It takes so long. Like, even though I knew I had to change a lot of things, it doesn't happen overnight. And in my own talks that I give worldwide, it's the same thing. I mean, you have to start somewhere, and you have to start picking at it one little bit at a time. And
Yeah.
you can't expect miracles to happen overnight, but you have to keep working at it. And is it easy? No. Is it fun? No. Is it painful? Yes. But if you want that change to happen, you have to dig, and you have to dig deep. And you have to actually look at yourself for not what happened to you. Yes, accept and acknowledge that, but that doesn't represent who you are and you have to start working towards that. And so, yeah, it's been quite the challenge for me. I now have 12 years sober, and I work worldwide with women in shelters and youth and juvenile homes. And I go to schools, I go to prisons, I create community events, and I do all this for free because most of these people, they don't have the money. I know, like, when I needed the help the most, I didn't have the money, but you're screaming for help, but where do you get the resources? So
Yeah. Well, and I love that you know that you've been called to share your healing light with the world in this way, right? And that abundance for you is part of that. And then your financial abundance, as you know, comes elsewhere. And, I so appreciated what you said about, like, the fact that when we don't heal, what happens is that the manifestation of our lives, our life will reflect the lack of healing that we have experienced, right? And
exactly.
until we can face ourselves, and even though healing is, trauma is not something that anybody asks for, but the reality is that we have to choose to heal. We have to know that healing is something we can say yes to, that healing is possible for us. And then from there, as soon as we decide that we want a better life, it's amazing how, and I use universe, source, creator, God interchangeably, how all kinds of resources start to show up. And the beautiful thing is that even though, yes, it can take years to heal, depending on what our journey is, depending on the kinds of strategies by which we tap into. But the beautiful thing is that there are a lot of things that can cause, major healing shifts, like EMDR, right? So it's beautiful that we're starting to pay more and more attention to trauma survivors and what kind of modalities have major efficacy, like yoga, like EMDR, like breath work, like energy work, along with, and therapies can certainly be a part of that supportive process. But there are a lot of kinds of modalities that we're learning that we can tap into that can put us on a trajectory of healing much sooner, so that we don't have to suffer any longer than what we have to as we are embarking upon our healing journey.
Stay tuned for more of Women Road Warriors coming up.
Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I have one question for you. Do you want to stop worrying about the IRS? If the answer is yes, then look no further. I've been around for years. I've helped countless people across the country, and my success rate speaks for itself. So now you know where to find good, honest help with your tax problems. What are you waiting for? If you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS or haven't filed in years, call me now at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com for a free consultation and get your life back.
Industry movement Trucking Moves America Forward is telling the story of the industry. Our safety champions, the women of trucking, independent contractors, the next generation of truckers, and more. Help us promote the best of our industry. Share your story and what you love about trucking. Share images of a moment you're proud of. And join us on social media. Learn more at truckingmovesamerica.com.
Welcome back to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro.
If you're enjoying this informative episode of Women Road Warriors, I wanted to mention Kathy and I explore all kinds of topics that will power you on the road to success. We feature a lot of expert interviews. Plus, we feature celebrities and women who've been trailblazers. please check out our podcast at womenroadwarriors.com and click on our episodes page. We're also available wherever you listen to podcasts, on all the major podcast channels like Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Amazon Music, Audible, you name it. Check us out and bookmark our podcast. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, YouTube, and other sites. And tell others about us. We want to help as many women as possible. There are many signs that a person may have experienced past trauma that still impacts them. Various things can come to the surface in our lives, like in our relationships. Things like substance abuse, anxiety, fear, overcompensating with work, or simply just not taking care of ourselves. These can be signs of past trauma. Therapist and author Demarra West is a trauma survivor who learned how to heal herself and now helps others. She's on a mission. She's the founder of Be Well Beautiful Woman and the author of Me Too, a therapist's journey to heal, find liberation, and joy. Demarra says holistic modalities have the ability to help people heal themselves and reclaim their power. Too often in trauma, we become disconnected from self, and this keeps us from fulfilling our needs and wants and achieving balance. Demarra helps people reclaim who they are and define a space in joy. Demarra, in our past segment, you mentioned many of the different therapies that trauma survivors now have, which includes EMDR. Kathy, didn't you say you had experience with EMDR?
EMDR, for those that don't know what that is, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Now, I used that. I was a guinea pig back in 2012, and
Wow.
in the women's center that I was at, it was a year-long program, and that was part of my treatment. And a lot of the women didn't want to try it, and I said, it had at the time. I don't know what the statistics are today, but at the time, it had a 75% success rate with alcoholics. And I'm, you know what? I'll do anything. I'll try anything. And because
Yeah.
this was the third time that I was in treatment, and that EMDR session, the sessions that I had were, they were, I'm missing the word, but they were exactly what I needed in order to change. Because in those sessions, it was like almost like a lightning bolt of how I learned. I recognized that my unworthiness, how I used to think what was defining me as being an unworthy person. Well, it did the flip, and I understood in those sessions how really worthy I am, and that who I am is not based on the opinion of man. And I had so many, I don't know how to explain it, but it was almost as if the neurons in my brain, they crossed, and I understood things in a completely different way. And it was the ultimate tool that helped me change. And never
Yeah.
again have I looked at myself since those sessions in the way that I used to before the sessions. And I highly recommend anyone that's going through some traumatic issues in life to really give it a try.
I've heard good things about EMDR. How exactly does that work? I know that they use it a lot with people with anxiety, PTSD, all of that. What exactly is happening, and how does this give people the ability to free themselves from anxiety and trauma and all of that?
Yeah. So, I mean, in a nutshell, what happens is that you're helping people to get into a very deep meditative state, and
Okay.
it's being guided by a certain way that you're asking the client to move their eyes. So, as they're getting into a deep, relaxed state, just like hypnosis, and you have that rapid eye movement that begins to happen. What's happening in that very deep state of rest, which is why we should meditate before we even are fully awake. We can go into a deeper set of meditation or a deeper state of our Reiki practice because we're not quite up yet. So what happens is that there is rapid movement in the brain that allows for new synapses to be created to allow for different narratives to begin to play out. It's almost like you can think of it as energetic movement, but like not this flow of a waterfall, right? So as you're being guided through this practice, so the idea used to be that people have to talk about their trauma before they can heal from it. Actually, EMDR flipped that completely on its head. because even though you're going back to moments when trauma maybe has happened to you, what you're not having to counter everything that happened, which in part prevents you from re-traumatizing from that experience that you had, right? Because our archaic brain holds on to the trauma as if we are still in that mode when certain triggers arise. Our body responds as if we are back in that state. This is why, people that are trauma survivors can oftentimes become agitated very quickly, because our things are imbalance. They're not balanced internally, and our energy that's associated with fight is ignited much more than the energy associated with rest. I mean, I'm not using the correct biological terms right now, but I think that people are ultimately getting the gist, because trauma affects every major organ center in the body.
Oh, yeah.
And so when we think about an osmosis state, if there has been imbalance created from this traumatic experience that our body has now registered, and anything that is familiar to that we're exposed to, that is any sense familiar to that thing, it's going to trigger us, and our body's going to respond as if. So ultimately, EMDR allows for the new brain connectivity to happen, so that a new story is painted. It's almost taking you back to the time when you were traumatized, so that then you can pick up from where you left off as that child that had this traumatic experience. So then it's like you're soothing that child in a way that wasn't able to be soothed during the time, because you're simply now having to move forward in your life, and there's no safe haven for the healing. And then whatever story you pick up on in that moment and the aftermath of it is a story that you hold on to, no matter how many times. Last thing I say, it's like telling someone who's thin, that believes that they're fat, that they're thin. You can tell them all day long. They can look at it in a mirror, and we can know that they're crumbling, that they're literally next to non-existent. They're so thin, but that's not what they see. So until they can see a different picture and create a different narrative, then they're always going to be stuck in that. So that was much longer than I thought it was going to be in terms of my explanation, but that's the gist of it. So
that gives our listeners kind of an idea of what that all is. So essentially, you're kind of maybe building new neural pathways and reprocessing. You had said that trauma affects children differently than adults. I find that interesting. And when you think about it, that makes sense. Children are basically just trying to learn to process everything in the world, and it's got to be so terrifying. And maybe that's one of the reasons when somebody experiences trauma, they don't even realize it. The brain forgets it, stuffs it somewhere. You think there are people that are just going through life not realizing that they had trauma because of that?
Oh, most definitely. And I don't know what the data reflects in terms of the estimated numbers of people that have had trauma experiences that they can't access that memory. In part, that's what the brain does to help us to survive, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or even if we do remember, our memories are very fragmented, right? We may remember a scent. We may remember a label on a beverage container. We may remember, so it's very fragmented. It's not, because what happens in trauma is that the right brain is ignited and the left brain is actually quieted, right? Left brain is where is where logic comes from. It's how we tell a story from beginning, middle, end. Well, our right brain is not, it's not activated in that way. It doesn't operate that way. So that's why our memories are fragmented when it comes to trauma, or we don't remember it all. Or so there are many people who have a sense that something may have happened to them, but they have no recollection of it. I've had many people over the course of my work say that to me, or or it will be in adulthood that people will start having flashbacks about trauma from their childhood, because of certain triggers that happened in combat, or it could be on a massage table and a masseuse touches you at a certain place, and all of a sudden you're moved to tears and you get this flashback of something that happened to you. So to the point where some people actually question, right? It's like, oh, could this even be possible? But if we're having flashbacks like that later on in life, then we can surmise that something probably happened. We can trust that. And so the way that it happens the reason why childhood trauma is more pervasive in part is because when we think about a child in their development, right? And so when trauma happens, it stunts our ability to develop in a lot of different ways. So for example, with childhood sexual trauma survivors, they actually mature at a much faster rate. So there's a correlation with when a child begins to a young girl or a boy for that matter, when puberty starts to set in, and it happens much faster because biologically a clock begins to get set when our body is exposed physiologically to a sexual experience, right? So then it sets a clock that the body is now ready to engage biologically, because the biological memory is really the archaic brain, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it has the ability to affect a child's attention span. So a lot of times children are being diagnosed with ADHD and ADD, but actually it's trauma, right? So when you think about that, if you're giving a diagnosis to a child and you begin to treat them accordingly to that diagnosis, but that's not the thing that it is, then you can't actually help that child get better, right? So not to mention a lot of there's health challenges in part because once trauma is ignited, so let's say trauma happens to you at the age of 5, right? All of the triggers of the aftermath of that trauma and how your body responds to them is affecting your organs in an adverse way. It's affecting your brain in an adverse way. So when we think about that, and you have no respite, this constant triggering that happens, and it's stacked upon stacked, and it's this replaying that happens across your lifespan. Of course, you're going, because of the longer term effects of having these triggers, it's going to have more of a wear and tear on those major organ systems that I talked about. So there's a lot, and so this is why people who are advocating for trauma experts in the field have been advocating for a different diagnosis for complex childhood trauma so that we can effectively treat children, but they haven't been able to make a whole lot of progress around that, right? Because for a lot of reasons, which I'm sure we don't even have time to talk about during this interview.
You've got some tremendous insight here. I had not heard that this happens to a child and that it can actually affect how quickly they grow and immature reproductively. But it makes total sense. I mean, our bodies are designed to reproduce. So the body is going to probably engage a clock. Okay, it's time to reproduce now. What a horrible thing. I mean, the child is going through. And, when you have a scar, a physical scar, you can see it. But if you have trauma, it's an internal scar you can't identify. And we have a tendency to want to hide our scars anyway. So mentally, you're going through life with all of this baggage. Childhood abuse is just so horrendous. Just, children trust the adults in their lives. That's the only thing they have for survival. And when people are violating them, they're going to go through life not trusting, and then I can understand the inferiority complex, and children will also guilt themselves.
Yeah, because, and you bring up something really important as well. And this is another reason why childhood trauma is so challenging for people to see and appropriately treat, right? Because we haven't given it the adequate space that it needs for that to happen. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that makes it challenging is that oftentimes children are being abused at the hands of their caregivers.
Yeah.
So when we think about that, when where does a child understand love from first? They understand it from their caregiver. Where do they get a sense of worthiness from?
Yep.
Where do they get a sense of efficacy from? They get it from their caregivers. So these are the people that you're relying on to care for you, and yet you're being abused by them. It also creates this dynamic around what you need to be to try to reduce the harm that you receive in this relationship because of the reliance on them to care for you, right?
Yeah.
So that provides a further layer. So anytime a person is being held at their will, and then you have to create a reliance on this person. This is why, sex trafficking, and people leaving those relationships can be so challenging.
Yep.
Because this is also someone that you're relying on to care for you,
Yep.
right? So, childhood trauma is it's challenging in part because we're not looking in the places that we need to look, and we're not asking ourselves the right questions either. And so this was another reason why I wrote my book, Me Too, A Therapist Journey to Heal, Find Liberation, and Joy, because it's not just the trauma itself that's problematic to a survivor, but it's also the aftermath of it. Because if a person can begin to heal right away, the impact of that trauma is going to weaken, right? That person is going to be able to get back to that state of reclaiming their power, integrating back into self, really stepping into their worthiness, telling themselves the right narrative. But if we don't believe survivors, right, how can survivors get the help that they need? If we're not asking ourselves the right questions, if we are educators, if we're in the mental health field, and we aren't adequately trained to work with trauma survivors as therapists, then we need to get additional training because therapists can do great harm. I talk about this in my book, the harm that my therapist did and that educators and law enforcement did to me. And so systems can do their part to make sure that children get to a place of healing and whomever, right, children and beyond. So we've got to believe survivors. We have to be proactive about protecting children.
Yep.
And where we're placing them. And if we come from trauma ourselves and we're going to embark upon being parents, and we know for certain we've had trauma in our lives, we have an invitation to be proactive about that. And instead of asking what is wrong with the child or what's wrong with the person, I think just reframing that to what has happened to them allows us to be in a state of empathy, and that curiosity acknowledges, right? Because whenever things are manifesting on the surface, like I think every person who's incarcerated has had trauma in their lives, right? Like the behaviors are a manifestation of the struggles that they had, and not having a platform for those pains that they've endured to go anywhere. Well, we don't ultimately hold on to anything. Eventually, it has to come out. Everything, pain demands to be felt. In the words of Fault in Our Stars, it's gonna go somewhere. And so if we can really see behaviors as a manifestation of pain, as a manifestation of trauma, I think all of us would be able to see and hear and do what needs to be done to help provide better safeguards for survivors.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? It could really change the course of everybody's life. Because when you think about it, when people are going through trauma, especially as a child, they have a different, and if you will, it's a skewed perception of how life is supposed to be. If you're in an abusive situation, you think that that's toxic love is what love is all about. And you just keep repeating that. If you are not being acknowledged and you are not being validated as a child, if you reach out to an adult and they blame you instead of helping you, you're going to have a lot of anger. You're going to start acting out. I mean, all of it makes sense. If there could be what you're talking about, it would be revolutionary, really.
Yes. And if we could begin to integrate more of these holistic practices at young ages, meditation, breath work, yoga, because even in the midst of our bodies being traumatized, those moments allow us the space to have ownership of our bodies. So I'm not saying that it is the thing that will cure something, particularly if some pain is happening, right? But if we can really do the work to become a trauma-informed environment, we would be much better suited to support young people. But a lot of times we're not putting these interventions in place until people are already incarcerated, right? We're
Yeah.
introducing yoga in the prison, yoga in the juvenile justice system. And I think those places for those, I think I love that we can ensure that individuals who are incarcerated have access to these, but imagine how different things would be if that access came much sooner in life and
Sure.
we approached it from prevention
Mhm.
versus the way that we present it now in
You
most
know,
cases.
and it, of course, is kind of indicative of our healthcare system. That's not based on prevention. You fix something after it happens instead of preventing it. So
Yeah.
all of that makes total sense. And if you instill some of these things early, ways for people to cope, it's going to change the outcome. It makes so much sense.
Stay tuned for more of Women Road Warriors coming up.
Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I have one question for you. Do you want to stop worrying about the IRS? If the answer is yes, then look no further. I've been around for years. I've helped countless people across the country, and my success rate speaks for itself. So now you know where to find good, honest help with your tax problems. What are you waiting for? If you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS or haven't filed in years, call me now at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com for a free consultation and get your life back.
Industry movement Trucking Moves America Forward is telling the story of the industry. Our safety champions, the women of trucking, independent contractors, the next generation of truckers, and more. Help us promote the best of our industry. Share your story and what you love about trucking. Share images of a moment you're proud of. And join us on social media. Learn more at truckingmovesamerica.com.
Welcome back to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro.
The brain does not always recollect trauma. People can go through life totally in the dark and have buried these experiences. One way we know that we've had trauma is if we have a sense of it, or if there's certain dysfunctional elements that crop up in our lives, like staying in abusive relationships, having a hard time maintaining a job, not aligning with our purpose, developing depression, anxiety, or fear. Something can trigger a memory or flashback after years of having the experiences buried in our minds. These are telltale signs that can give us opportunities to heal. Trauma stunts our ability to develop in proper ways, both physically and mentally, and anything we haven't faced stops us from healing. Trauma affects children differently than adults, and it's more challenging to treat because children are often abused at the hands of their caregivers, which interrupts their way to understand love and self-worth. Therapist and author Demarra West says that all of us need to be acknowledged in the fabric of healing. There are a lot more people suffering than what we realize, and it's an opportunity for all of us to rise to know that we too have had similar experiences. We have to choose to heal and know that help is available to us so we can become whole. To help others with trauma, we must come from a place of empathy. We need to see the manifestations of pain and trauma so we know what needs to be done to help someone become whole. Demarra, there's so much that we can discuss here. You are just a wealth of information. Your book, Me Too, A Therapist's Journey to Heal, Find Liberation and Joy. Where do people find that? Because I think that this is going to be tremendous for so many people.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. The book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. There is an ebook version as well. And I'm in the process of recording an audiobook and working on a reader's guide as well. So folks can look out for those things in the next couple months too.
Wonderful. And you're the founder of Be Well, Beautiful Woman. What exactly is that? I thought we could touch on that real quickly and also find out if you work with people remotely.
Yeah, absolutely. So Be Well, Beautiful Woman, it's a global wellness company that focuses on accessible wellness to promote liberation and healing and joy in people's lives. And so what that currently entails is like wellness coaching and retreats. I host the Be Well Beautiful Woman podcast. We do a lot of education. Like I have a global abundance summit that's happening right now as we speak. And we do a lot of things that are financially accessible to ensure that wellness is not something just for people that have money to pay for it. You know, we know wellness is a $1 trillion industry. And then, of course, I have market rate clients that can invest in the work too, but we really focus on accessibility as much as we can. So I can really relate to what my friend was saying earlier about not charging for the services that she provides to make sure that the people who need it most get the message.
It's so important. And there's so many
So
resources. There's so many resources out there, but people don't have the availability because they don't have the health insurance, they don't have the money, and it is so needed. Now, how do people reach out to you, Demarra?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are pretty active on Instagram, and that's at the letter B. So not B-E, just the letter B. Well, beautiful. And then folks can find us at bewellbeautifulwoman.com. And always shoot us an email at info@bewellbeautifulwoman.com as well. And yes, we do work with one-on-one clients and do a lot of organizational and corporate kinds of wellness kinds of offerings too.
I just found you on Instagram and I added.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
100%.
Demarra, you are an amazing woman. Thank you so much for what you're doing for people. This is just awesome.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. I'm just grateful for you both and just the work that you do to bring messages like this to women from all walks of life. I'm very, very appreciative to have this space with you.
Thank you, Demarra. Yes, if we help just one person, I think that we've accomplished what we need to. Because
I think we're going to be helping quite a few more than one, Shelley. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. And that's
this
what
is
I'm
a pretty powerful podcast.
Oh, it really is.
What I mean?
Like, yes, wow. It is. Wow.
Yeah.
The messaging here, Demarra, we could talk to you for hours. You've got some tremendous insight. You really do.
Thank you. Thank you. Such an honor to be with you both today. And Kathy, thank you for sharing so much of yourself. And you know, I believe that universe, God, source, creator doesn't make any mistakes. So the fact that our lives have aligned in terms of our lived experience in so many ways, it's just a gift to know that, right? There's nothing like being in space with people that have had similar kinds of experiences. I think we can all connect on a human level in a myriad of ways, but nothing like being in spaces with people who are me too when it comes to that lived experience of trauma. So
I agree 100%. What a blessing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Demarra. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this latest episode. And if you want to hear more episodes of Women Road Warriors or learn more about our show, be sure to check out womenroadwarriors.com. And please follow us on social media. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. On our website, we also have a selection of podcasts just for women. There are a series of podcasts from different podcasters. So if you're in the mood for women's podcasts, just click the Power Network tab on womenroadwarriors.com. You'll have a variety of shows to listen to anytime you want to. Podcasts made for women. Women Road Warriors is on all the major podcast channels like Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, YouTube, and others. So check us out, and please follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro. If you want to be a guest on the show or have a topic or feedback, email us at sjohnson@womenroadwarriors.com.